I'm a little speechless right now, I have to be honest with you. I've been running JTV for quite a few years now, and from time to time I share with you videos about prophecy found within the Torah that shed light on and prophesize massive major events in Jewish history and world history. But I think I've come across something that is so related to our current events right now, to what happened on October 7th. And it's just a little bit jaw-dropping, to be honest. And I want to share it with you and see what you think of this. Because the depth and wisdom and prophecy, really, within our Torah is just incomparable. And such a clear pointing to its divine nature. Now, before I go into this, let me give you a little bit of background, which I think will also really impress you, before I talk about how this relates to what's happening at the moment in Israel. I want to share with you an idea that Rabbi Benjamin Blech wrote in one of his books. Basically, what he says is that if you look at the verses in the Torah, something that a Kabbalist explained to him and said, actually, I don't want you to reveal this, but then many years later said, you can now reveal this. A Kabbalist that he met in Israel, someone that goes into and looks and studies the deeper levels of Torah, he pointed out something incredible. He said, the creation of the state of Israel happened as an expression of God's will exactly when it was predicted to occur in the Bible. Predicted exactly when it was supposed to. And he said, Rabbi Blech asked, I don't recall the promise of return to the land being identified with a specific year. And he replied, let me reveal to you the secret of sentences in the Torah. I had no idea what he meant. Sentences? What secret could he possibly be referring to? And he said, let me show you something. He confided in me an insight that he had received from his teachers that left me gasping. The year that the state of Israel was born was 1948 on the secular calendar. Now, in our traditional way of counting, the date was the year 5708. That's the Hebrew year, 5708. And he said, know that the verses in the Torah correspond to the years of history. Every major event of all times will have some allusion to it, direct or indirect, in the verse that is linked to it by number. Do you know, he asked me, what the 5708th verse is in the Bible? Of course, I had no idea. So he told me, and I subsequently verified it. The 5708th verse in the Torah is Deuteronomy, or Devarim in Hebrew, chapter 30, verse 3. This is in the Gregorian calendar, the year 1948. What does the verse say? And the Lord your God will turn your captivity and have compassion upon you, and will return and gather you from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. Amazing. And it seemed too good to be true. Perhaps it was just a remarkable coincidence. One of those quirks that are more entertaining than instructive. But it was certainly intriguing. The one verse that speaks of the return to the land after centuries of exile is actually the very same biblical sentence whose number corresponds to the year in which this unlikely event occurred in modern times. In fact, Maimonides, the Rambam, who is a classic Torah commentator, when he gives one sentence to talk about, from the entire Torah, to talk about the importance of belief in the prophecy of the messianic fulfillment of the end of days, it's precisely this verse that he alludes to. But then, Rabbi Blech found the nerve to ask this Kabbalist. He said, do you mean, he hesitated, inquiring, that this is not simply an isolated instance? Is it a principle that relates equally to other major events? Could I, for example, find a comparable reference to the Holocaust? Just as well as we did for the time of national redemption. And he responded, why not try it for yourself? So I counted the verses backwards, making note of the number as well as corresponding year. The previous chapter, Deuteronomy 29, is the one whose sentences correspond to the years of the Holocaust from the mid-1930s to the end of World War II, which would be the Hebrew year 5705. With halting breath, I read the phrase that sprung out at me in the verses whose biblical placement was linked with the horrible years of genocide and the Germans' determination to implement what they called the final solution. The words clearly spoke out of that terrible time in history. Quote, "All the curses of the covenant, the plagues of that land, and the sickness with which the Lord has made it sick. The whole land is brimstone and salt and a burning, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah. Even the nations shall say, 'Why has the Lord done this?'" It was true. The sentences linked by number to the years of the Holocaust, as described, as if written at the very same time the events occurred, the horrors and afflictions of that unimaginable era. But there was another amazing revelation that appeared. The verse that corresponds to 5705, which is 1945 in the English Gregorian calendar, stunned me with its powerful message. It is, of course, the sentence that serves as the Torah's final word on the Holocaust and its meaning. It is God's summary as well as his explanation, quote unquote, for now at least. Of course, our full explanation we will get at the end of history. But what do the words we are so anxious to hear have to tell us? Note carefully the text, because I believe it represents the very best and most appropriate judgment that human beings can possibly offer as we consider the events of those days. Quote, "The secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law." When all is said and done, God is wiser than we are. God understands more than we do. In the profound words of the 11th century sage, Baya ibn Pakuda, if we could understand God, we would be God. At times we may grasp some of his ways as we probe for reasons and explanations. We can occasionally grab hold of some truths that illuminate God's compassion and guidance of our lives. In those moments we are overwhelmed by his greatness. But in times of confusion we cannot comprehend how God could possibly seem so immune to our suffering. We reassure ourselves that God's love for us is the constant that will never, ever change. The biblical epitaph to the Holocaust must be our response to the travails of everyday life. The secret things belong to the Lord our God. There are some things we will never understand, certainly while we are living in exile where God hides his face. But our faith must be stronger than our misfortunes. Our belief can survive questions that have only partial answers. What remains for us is acceptance of God's will to carry out the words of his law. In them we find purpose to our lives and meaning for our existence. But, my dear viewer, it doesn't stop here. This is the end of the chapter in his book, and it was written many years before October 7th, 2023 happened. But I decided, after reading this, I wonder if I could extend this principle by looking into the verses that would correspond to the Hebrew year that October 7th took place in. And I'm going to show that to you now. Let's have a look and see what the verses tell us. The Hebrew year of October 7th, it was just into the new year because we'd just celebrated Rosh Hashanah in October 2023, or then I guess late September. The Hebrew year was 5784. What does that correspond to? Well, I'm about to show you. The verse it corresponds to is this. It's chapter 32, verse 29. If they were wise, they would understand this. They would reflect upon their fate. Okay, who is this talking about? What is this all about? If who were wise, if who understood this, what has this got to do with anything? Well, just watch. Because when you look at the context of what this is saying, goodness me, there's a very clear message and correlation that we find. Scroll back just a few verses and let's understand this. God is talking about the Jewish people in verse 21 of chapter 32. And what does he say? They have provoked my jealousy with a non-God, provoked my anger with their vanities. He's saying the Jewish people need to put their faith and trust in me. They need to return to me. And his jealousy, which indicates his real love for the Jewish people and desiring of relationship with them, he wants them to turn away from trusting in things and devoting themselves to things that are not godly. So he says, so I will provoke their jealousy. Like a deeply besotted lover who wants the attention of his people. But he says, I will provoke their jealousy with a non-people. Provoke their anger with a foolish nation. A non-people. Dear viewer, dare I suggest to you, if you've watched any of the videos that I've been saying over the last 18 months or so since the war began, what do I always say about the Palestinian cause, the Palestinians? It's a non-cause. They are a non-people. They pretend to be a people. They've created this flag and identity, but as I've said time and again, they're not interested in a nation state. They just created this narrative to undermine Israel. The proof of which being, had they won in 1948 or 1967, what I mean is the surrounding Arab armies, and conquered Israel, there would be no Palestine. All these Arab countries would have a chunk of the land, and none of the Arabs would care, because they consider themselves Arabs. Another proof is that when Egypt and Jordan conquered parts of the territory from 1948 to 1967, they didn't liberate Palestine and create a Palestinian mini-state there, and the Arabs living there didn't call for one. Again, proving the point. A further proof is, if all the Jews converted to Islam, God forbid, in Israel, I guarantee you they would no longer support the Palestinian cause. They wouldn't see a need for it. It's religious for them. So then what it talks about is how this foolish nation, this non-people, will cause terror. I will use my arrows on them. It's amazing. We learn in a midrash, a biblical commentary on the Torah, that Ishmael, the forefather of the Arabs, would send flaming arrows towards Isaac, Yitzchak. Flaming arrows of flaming fire. Sounds awfully lot like rockets. And then it speaks about terror that they will do to the Jewish people. Young men and maidens suckling babes with venerable elders, people of all ages, indiscriminate attacking on the people of Israel. And then what happens? Then God says, and this is in the year before, this would correspond to the year before October 7th, just as they're planning it and are ready to attack. Were it not that the enemy's wrath was heaped up, lest their adversaries distort, lest they claim our hand was triumphant, the Lord did none of this. So then God says, for they are a nation devoid of counsel, and they have no understanding. He says, if they were wise, they would understand this, they would reflect upon their fate. So what's he saying? This nation, this foolish non-people, are attacking the Jews. They're causing terror upon them. And they may think, look at this terror that we're doing to the Jews. Maybe that validates our belief. Maybe that validates the God we worship. That validates who we are. Maybe God really is on our side. And then the next verse says, God asks, how can one of you pursue 1,000 of them and put 10,000 to fight, unless their mighty rock has sold them out and the Lord has given them over? In other words, it's talking about one pursuing 1,000, which if you think about it in the context of October 7th, the people of Gaza, who were a lot less numerous than the people of Israel, a lot less mighty in military strength than the state of Israel, they were able to come through and cause so much damage. They could think to themselves, clearly God is on our side. But God says, oh no, don't think that you could do this unless it was my will and decree as part of this great unfolding plan of history. And God continues, for their rock is not like our rock. Nevertheless, our enemies sit in judgment. Nevertheless, they think that their God is being validated by their success, whereas really it's just God allowing certain evil to take place. For their vine is of the vine of Sodom and of the field of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of Rosh, and they have bitter clusters. Their wine is the bitterness of serpents and the bitterness of the ruthless cobras. Is it not stored up with me, sealed up in my treasuries? Vengeance, God says, is poised with me, and it will pay at the time their foot stumbles. For the day appointed of their reckoning is near, and what is destined for them hastens. God says, let it be clear. They may have had one small victory, but vengeance is mine. And God assures the people of Israel in the next verse, when the Lord will judge his people and will reconsider his servants when he sees that the power is increasing and none is controlled or strengthened. Then he will say, where is their deity, the rock in which they trusted, who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their libations? Let them arise and help you. Let them be your shelter. See now that it is I am the one, and there is no God like me. I cause death and grant life. I strike, but I heal, and no one can rescue from my hand. For I raise up my hand to heaven and say, as I live forever, when I sharpen the blade of my sword and my hand grasps judgment, I'll bring vengeance upon my adversaries and repay those who hate me. God is now promising that he is going to deliver the people of Israel and exact justice and vengeance on Israel's enemies, which is, by the way, something we're starting to see now, where Israel is starting to fight back and to get rid of all these evil organizations and people and leaders. I will intoxicate my arrows with blood, and my sword will consume flesh from the blood of the slain and the captives. And the captives. I mean, you know what that's referring to? Captives mean hostages from the first breach of the enemy. And then God continues, sing out praise, O you nations, for his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, inflict revenge upon his adversaries, and appease his land and his people. And then that's the end of the song, and Moses then comes and says and speaks all of these words of the song into the ears of the people. And this is really at the end of Moses' journey with the Jewish people. So what God is saying is he says there's going to be this non-people that's going to inflict terror on the Jewish people. And then he will exact judgment and vengeance on them. But this is so obviously related to the times we're living in now. But isn't it interesting that the verse that corresponds to the year of October 7th is saying that this nation that thinks and plans to terrorize the people of Israel, that has already done some of this, and then is about to, as it says in the next verse, pursue them. 1, pursue 1,000. 2, put 10,000 to flight. Which is sort of the image I think of when I think about the Nova Festival massacre and others. But it's saying in this key verse, if they were wise, they would understand this, they would reflect upon their fate. At the end of the day, what happened on October 7th? For a moment, God forsook his people, and we saw celebrations in Gaza. We saw people handing out candy in celebration for what happened when Hamas were able to do what they did, where 1 could pursue 1,000 and 2 put, what was the specific word of it? And 2 put 10,000 to flight. They thought this is vindication of their God, of their belief system, of their death cult ideology. And God is reassuring the people. Their whole plan here, what they're doing and what they did on October 7th, where they thought this vindicates them. He says, if they're wise, they would understand and reflect upon their fate. And what is their fate? That God may have forsook his people for a moment, but in the end he will exact vengeance and justice. This actually, I believe, gets to the heart of the Israeli-Arab conflict. If they were wise, they would understand this, they would reflect upon their fate. They think that since Israel was re-established in 1948, it has shaken to the core the Muslim world's view of history, its view of very religion. Because if their narrative is, we are the new chosen people, the new chosen vessels of God's word through the Quran, through Islam, the Jews, obviously they've been rejected by God because they're scattered across the world. They've been the wandering Jew, downtrodden, second-class citizens. This vindicates our narrative. But then the Jews suddenly return. What does that mean? What does it mean that the Jews suddenly seem to have God's favour again? It looks like God has kept his promise to the Jews. Yes, he said he'd exile them, but now he's returning them. What do you do with that as a Muslim? Well, on the one hand, you could say, well, maybe God never forsook the Jewish people. That's very hard to accept that, because then it's going to lead to all kinds of theological implications. Or, alternatively, you say, well, no, nothing's changed in our story. Islam is going to expand and conquer the world, and so this must be a test from God. This must be a Satan that we need to destroy, as they try to destroy Israel. And then, if they are successful in that, and that's of course what they've tried to do time after time, and was what they were intending to do on October 7th, and hoping that the rest of the Arab world and Muslim world would join in once they started this. They celebrated thinking, wow, yes, our religion, the concept of God has been vindicated now. But God says at this moment, in the year that corresponds to October 7th, 2023, the 5,784th verse in the Torah, God says, as you're about to embark on this, as one is about to pursue 1,000 and think that they're going to be successful, and think that their success is down to them, God says to them, do not think like that. And if you were wise, you would understand this and reflect upon your fate. He says, but instead they are a foolish people who don't look at history properly. And God says, how can one pursue 1,000 and two put 10,000 to fight unless their rock had sold them out and the Lord had given them over? And in the verses that follow, it speaks about redeeming captives, speaks about God's vengeance for his people. I think it's telling us, and it's telling of what is now to come. The time of Israel's redemption is arriving. And this is not going to be like previous eras. The eras of the wandering Jew, the scattered Jew, the persecuted Jew. We're being reassured in these verses that redemption is going to be guaranteed by the God of Israel. And I just think that to look at this verse, to look at the context of the verse, before and after, it's, in my view, impossible to look at that and not reflect deeply on the immense prophecy and divinity of our Torah. But let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think of this. I, for one, am a little bit speechless. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.